inspired you guys to go about this project? Like, what was the main inspiration?
Well, it was really kind of over the last 10 or 12 years, me being sort of in the middle of all of this growing resurgence of the fan base. I just kept hearing over and over again these amazing stories of these personal connections with the Monster Squad itself. And I thought over time that those would kind of die down or weather off, and they never did. They just kept coming and getting deeper and more awesome. And about 2 years ago, I thought of an idea that was like, this could be a really neat story to tell those stories, and how do you go about doing that?
Yeah, and then Andre and I met, and Monster Squad was such an important part of my life. We started talking about this idea of a documentary and the aesthetics of it, and we didn't want this to be a companion piece to the movie Monster Squad. We wanted it to be a successful standalone documentary on its own. And we started digging deep and developed these ideas about what it means to be a cult film and why people connect with movies they love, and that kind of created the fabric for the doc.
Gotcha. And if you guys could just like shed a little bit more light on the creative process for this documentary.
Yeah, well, it kind of started with those stories about the fans, and I wanted to, find some way to turn the focus around on the fan base that had kept this movie alive for 30 years. And then, Henry and I started, developing sort of the concept of what it could be, what it should be, and, what it may aspire to be at some point, very early on in that process. And, there were certain things, like Henry just mentioned, we wanted to make sure it wasn't. And we wanted to hit some targets that we really knew were important. And I think what we ended up with was something, much deeper, much more layered, and a little bit more broad story, but kind of very, told through the lens of Monster Squad fans, and really kind of capture that essence of how this movie impacted a lot of people. And the process was really, getting together, developing an idea, ending up, pitching that concept to, the studio that, Pilgrim's inside of it, Henry's inside of it, Pilgrim Media Group, and convincing the studio to get on board and trust that this is a thing, and trust that our way that we want to approach it could lead to something good, and we just started from there.
To dig deep into the creative, one of our first out of California interviews was in Philadelphia at WizardCon, and we had the opportunity to interview Chuck Russell and Heather Langenkamp. And there wasn't a lot of room. We went to this underground club called The Underground. And we were in the VIP room, and there was this little lamp in the corner that had kind of stained glass type colors to it, and it projected these red and orange hues. So we changed our shooting style a little bit and just embraced the room we were in. And that ended up being an aesthetic throughout the documentary, which was very helpful, because when you're talking about industry creatives or fans, you're talking about people that collect memorabilia from their childhood of pop culture and things that they love. So it wasn't just the interview subject that became part of the character, but also the rooms and environments that they put themselves in. One of the places was Ciro's house, where he had collected robots, aliens, and monsters, and it filled the entire garage. And you could see what he loves in the foreground and the background. And that really became part of the visual aesthetic.
Gotcha. And also, what is it from Monster Squad that has such a huge impact on you that you felt like as if you had to carry it and somehow like pour it into WolfMan's Got Nards?
Well, I think it was from, like I briefly mentioned that, to kind of start it off, being, the lead in the Monster Squad, and then sort of being that initial interface with the fan base for over the last 10 or 12 years, and then being sort of like I was sort of the de facto gatekeeper to the fandom world of this movie for a while, and going to conventions and retro screenings and appearances, for the last 10 or 12 years. What I pulled from it was that all the fans out there that thought they were the only ones that liked this movie in their neighborhood or their class or in their family, but they realized that they shared it with a friend or two in the neighborhood, or their cousin, or their younger brother or their younger sister. They all started to come together over the last 10 or 12 years, and now they're interconnected. And I thought that was a pretty powerful dynamic that I don't know many movies as an example of that. And so I thought that was a neat dynamic that I wanted to find some way to capture, and I think we really worked hard at really trying to capture that true spirit and that essence and the authenticity of the fan base for this movie.
When you're talking about cult film and you're talking about horror film, you're talking about a group of outsiders and outcasts. I grew up in Alaska where the winters were long and the days were short. I inherited a VHS tape with a white label, and it wasn't the dirty kind. It was a dub of Monster Squad from the HBO broadcast. As a kid, I put that in the VCR, and I fell in love with these group of kids that I considered my friends. And because of that, I started developing friends and also a trade because I started making my own movies. And then that turned into me eventually becoming a filmmaker and working with Andre to make his documentary. That's a pretty cool 360 thing. When Andre started, he was in front of the camera, and now here he is behind the camera as a director. So in a big bad way, Monster Squad changed both of our lives, and we were interested in how it changed other people's lives.
That's so awesome. So if you could also discuss as to like what did you guys find the most overwhelming as far as like trying to execute this project?
From a physical or logistical production standpoint, or
Overall,
just,
yeah.
I think overall, what was really fascinating about this whole production is we shot this movie, we kind of developed the concept, did the deal, started shooting the movie, and Henry finished it within 12 months.
Nice.
And there's a lot that's not in the documentary that just didn't make it. We've got tons and tons of awesome footage. So I think for me, hindsight is how much actual stuff we got that was awesome.
Yeah.
And then you lament that you can't use it all because some of it's amazing and it's not in there, right?
For sure.
But really what it was sort of, you look back, it was sort of, you're never going to be able to recreate last year of what we were trying to do this documentary, because we were trying to shoot a documentary at the same time we were trying to celebrate separately as cast of the Monster Squad the 30th anniversary year, which means 3, 4, 5 huge conventions, a 17-city Alamo Drafthouse theater tour, other retro screenings, Halloween appearances, Comic-Con appearances, all this, while weaving a production inside of that, you try to match up those schedules and people and bodies and gear, and we just kind of just mashed it together and just kind of knocked it out and just absorbed everything that went along the way. So I think what I took out of it was an amazement of how much just essence that we kind of absorbed out of that year, and then we mashed that down into a 90-minute documentary, and I think it's bursting at the seams with stuff. So that's what I appreciate about it.
It's definitely the biggest challenge. This is 91 minutes and it's jam-packed. It might be one of the most jam-packed 91 minutes you'll ever screen when you watch it in a few minutes. If we had every celebrity and every fan in this documentary, it would be 3.5 hours long. And so the biggest challenge was listening to what the movie wanted to say and following that narrative and focusing on that singular story and the threads that weave in and out of it to make a complete experience. And I believe we did it. You let me know after you see it.
So throughout the tour, a lot of folks have been giving a lot of positive critique about this. Like, how do you guys feel overall? Like, what was your reaction? Like, wow, like, this.
Look, I mean, you screen it because I think we have a good product, right?
Yeah.
And honestly, if you showed something that had to do with Monster Squad to a theater full of Monster Squad fans, they're probably gonna like most of it. But I think we really added a lot more elements and layers to this, and everybody's really surprised of how much is in there and where this movie goes, and the stories and the kind of explaining of this fandom, and also how it impacted everybody that was involved with it, whether it was positive or not positive, or not as positive. But to get the reaction that we've been getting over the last 6 months since we premiered at our first film festival, and then just traveling all over the place. This movie's been all over the world now in the last 6 months, and just really gotten an overwhelmingly positive response. And look, you try to you produce something, you direct something, you work on something as much as Henry did on this, and to get those overwhelmingly positive kind of responses and technical reviews is pretty cool. It's pretty satisfying, and what that shows is we just really appreciate the fact that what we were trying to do and the targets we were trying to hit were coming through, and it was landing. Yeah. But we tried to do it subtly and with skill, and with some artistic conception in there. And I mean, Henry just knocked it out of the park with, everything that we had, discussed and really tried to do. And I think that resonates, and the fans and the reviewers and festival people, really kind of, now they're connecting with another movie that is about a movie that they connected with 30 years ago or whenever they saw it. So it's pretty satisfying. And I hope that, that continues as we go through, a few more festivals here.
Me too. Wolfman's Got Nards isn't just a love letter to the movie and to the audience. It's a love letter to the movie theater. It's a love letter to the horror community. And I feel so fortunate that they've embraced us back and supported us after we made that love letter. It's the equivalent of giving your true love a Valentine in 4th grade, and she says, "Yeah, I like you too."
Awesome. And since you're mentioning about how this is some sort of a love letter, not just to Monster Squad, but the overall the movie experience itself, what are your hopes as to this will somehow ignite or impact the fan, as far as maybe them possibly doing a remake of Monster Squad, hopefully a great one, or a sequel to Monster Squad, several decades later.
Well, that's a conversation that comes up, or a question that gets asked, regularly. And but if this documentary was responsible for something like that actually happening, that would be way beyond anything you could dream of, and it would just be amazing, right? What I do think is interesting is if that were to happen, I don't think it would be because of this documentary. I think it would be due to the fans, yet again, of how something impacted them. So if this documentary is connecting with the fans and revving them up for something and wanting more, they're going to be the ones that get their voices heard, and someone would be like, hey, let's look at this a little bit closer. Maybe there's something here that we can actually give to these fans. And as long as they do it right and with the right heart and the right authenticity, I think the fans would respond to that. Well, I'd love to be responsible for a movement like that, but you don't go into something with that goal. That if it works out, something like that, that'd be amazing. But you think back to 2006, 2007, that the fans themselves were the ones that actually spurred the studio, which was Lionsgate at the time, to actually put this movie on DVD, because it was dead. It was dead. It was dead in the water. It was dead in the ether. Dead in space, floating lifeless and frozen in space for eternity. And the fans, that the gravity of the fans pulled it back down into orbit and warmed it up and gave it life again. And I think that's a neat. You can call it fandom, you can call it fan fervor, grassroots, whatever you want to call it. It's really what the essence of movies are. It's the people that watch them that connect with them. And that's what spurred to DVD. If people watch this documentary and, get inspired to do something on their own, they get inspired to voice their opinion and want more, Monster Squad, themed thing, that's amazing. But it's about the fans.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anything like that?
Yeah, I hope that if you watch this documentary through a creative lens, you'll see that there's a storyline designed especially for you. And I hope Wolfman does inspire future creatives. And not necessarily in a sequel or remake kind of way, but if they do, they should call up Andre and absolutely cast him. I hope it inspires them to create their own stories that they were motivated to create because of the things they loved in Monster Squad or 80s nostalgia films. And I hope they create their own IP and they start producing their own narratives and they add to that ether, and then call Andre and cast him.
So, one last minute thing, what are your thoughts on imagine if Sean and the rest of the squad kind of just I don't know, they fell into a wormhole, went into an alternate dimension, and somehow landed in Hawkins with Mike, Lucas, Dustin, and the gang from Stranger Things. What would be your thoughts on that?
That would be an amazing mashup of two powerful kind of foundational Anytown USAs that come together, right? I think you mentioned Stranger Things in particular is really sort of an amalgam of this current nostalgia wave of that scary kids adventure with an Amblin feel, kind of warm blanket that you're really comfortable with, and we all resonate with that, and that's why it's so popular and we all crave it. And like Henry said, I think if that's your style, if that's your thing, that something inspires you to go make it, let's go make more of that stuff. More Stranger Things, more Monster Squad-esque stuff, more Stand By Me stuff, more Stephen King words on a page that get translated into live action type stuff, because we all understand that. And I think we've got our window is still open for our generation to create that and put that out there, and then we move on to the next one, because time is boss, really. And but I think it's a neat little wave that we're in right now.
I think Rudy would wonder why none of the kids are smoking cigarettes.
Yeah, we'd be riding our bikes upside down, and that'd be kind of rad though. But it's neat to see movies like Monster Squad, movies like Goonies, movies like Stand By Me, movies like Explorers, and all these great sci-fi, horror, kid comedy movies that have inspired people throughout the 90s and the 2000s, which are the creatives of today. You can totally feel that chord that they're connecting with what they like, and that's every generation of filmmakers and things. The great horror movies of the late 70s and early mid 80s, they were inspired on the original horror movies of the 40s and the 50s when they were kids, right? And so you just have this this awesome kind of infusion of your generation, and then you get old enough to where you actually do something about it. And I think that we're seeing a really neat kind of output of that dynamic now, and I hope it goes on for a while because I dig it.
Me too, absolutely. Any last words that you would like to share with your fans, your viewers, your audiences?
WolfMan's got Nards.
That's a good one to close with. I just think it's we made this documentary because there's this amazing connection to this movie with a fan base, and it's not in a particular area. It's all over. Everybody's different and individual. They're all part of this thing that they're connected with to each other now, not just to a movie. I think that is kind of one of my favorite things that's come out of the Monster Squad, and that's why we wanted to make the documentary, to tap into that connection. And what we're seeing now is that we're kind of reinforcing that connection and kind of cranking up the amplitude of even more energy through that connection with this documentary, because they're resonating again and getting kind of re-energized and really connecting again with themselves.
Yes.
Not just the things that they like, but people are finding a reconnection with themselves and their inner self and their inner enthusiasm. And that, like Henry said, that's what can inspire you to go make something, or that can inspire you to just be in a different frame of mind, on a Saturday morning and go, I'm going to do this differently this week. And we've had stories like that. People are like, look, this is amazing, and we're going along the ride with you, and that's just amazing to be a part of that. So I don't think it's an individual ride. It's not just me and Henry going on this. This is sort of like this train that's going up this slowly elevating track, but it's actually gaining steam as it's going uphill, and there's just cars and cars and cars of people that are just coming along with us. And I think that's a pretty bitchin' thing to happen.
I think in a modern day climate, in fan culture, it's important to be inclusive. And Monster Squad fans are the most kind, nicest fans that will bring anyone into the tribe. And we're happy to be a part of that.
Awesome. Well, guys, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for everything.
No, thank you for having us. We appreciate it.